Hey folks, Will Brink here, www.brinkzone.com, and today this is sort of part two from the video I did on how supplements are produced, but it's kind of a summary of the industry itself that I think will be an eye-opener to some people. But over the years, I've done videos and articles exposing contaminants. For example, I wrote the first articles years ago on the contaminants found in some creatine products, which at the time was basically unknown and changed the industry and caused a lot of heat for me and other people, and it was a pretty big deal in the industry at the time anyway. And over the years I've continued to do my best to walk that fine line between exposing the junk and remaining in the industry and doing work in the industry as a consultant and as a writer and that type of thing. But I've also often gotten flack and complaints from people that I will put out a bunch of tests and not name the company. And the reason for this is, among various reasons, one of them, but I'll tell you the main reason is, if you go and put test results out of some company, you are very likely to get yourself sued, of course, or end up, for libel or some reason. Now, a lot of people will say something like, well, if you have the test results, what can they do? By saying that comment, what it tells me is you have watched too many television court dramas and don't understand how the real world works in this industry or any industry, to be honest with you. And I'll give you some examples. Some years ago, a couple of guys I knew were businessmen, but they were also, big into working out, and they had a great idea, which was they were going to take products and they were going to test them, and they were going to test them at two separate labs so that nobody could say it was the one lab, and then they were going to put it in a book and print it. And that's a great idea. I'm sure you're saying, wow, what a great idea. And they came to me with this idea, and they said, would you write the foreword to our book, because we know you're sort of a champion of this type of thing. And I said, sure, I'll write the foreword for you. I said, but you're not going to get a second book out. And they said, well, why not? We've got the tests. What are they going to do? And I said, well, do you have the money to really defend yourself in court over such a thing? And they sort of brushed me off. So they are, shortly after that, at a big show called the Expo West. That's a big industry show. They had a booth. And the owner of one of the companies that did not test very well, big supplement company, came up to them and said, I don't like what you're doing, and I'll have you shut down in 6 months. And he had them shut down in 6 months. They didn't have the money to go to court with this big company, and they never had a second issue. So that's the reality of how things work. And that's not just the supplement industry. I mean, you remember Consumer Reports has been sued several times, multiple times, by car companies and stuff. Though there was one, I forget which vehicle it was, but they showed the vehicle had a high rate of rollover on a sharp turn, and the company sued them. I want to say it was a Isuzu, but I'm not positive. Anyway, they were sued, because they thought that the testing was unfair and so on, and they lost. But that's because Consumer Reports has deep pockets and the ability to fight such a thing and the willingness to fight such a thing. I'll give you another example of my own experience. Some years ago, I had done some work for a supplement company. I had a contract with them. I had a non-compete, non-disclosure, so on and so on. A product that I designed for them, they basically turned down, and about a year later, out came a product that was almost identical to the one that I had pitched to them that they turned down. They obviously were trying to avoid paying me for the work that I had done. And I went to see my lawyer, a very high-powered lawyer as a matter of fact, and he said, your contract was tight. I think you have a very good case here. You'll probably win this case. He said, but if they decide to fight, it's going to run you probably about $75,000 to $100,000 to win this case. Do you have $100,000? And I said, no, I do not. At the time especially. This was, a decade ago. So when people give me flack about various things, about the way I have to approach giving out this information, they need to stop watching television docudramas, and if they have never actually dealt with this type of stuff in the real world, they would understand how this really works. And at the same time, even not on the legal issues, I work in the industry and I do not need to nor want to alienate myself outside of the industry with the work that I try to do, which is to, like I say, do the consulting work and be involved in research and writing and R&D and that type of thing, where I try to make the industry and the products industry better for everybody. So I just wanted to give you a little inside reality of how this works. Anyone who has dealt with how this works in the real world understands that basically bottom line is he who has the deep pockets is he who wins, unfortunately. And that's the way the real world works. So that's my sort of addendum to some of these other articles, and the last one I did on how products get paid, where people said, oh, that's great info, Will, but list for me the good and bad companies. Sorry guys, it doesn't work like that. I wish it did. Maybe someday I will, be able to do something like that. And one little sort of add, and this is a little changing the topic, but it just kind of shows you the way things work. I've given up a lot of money in this industry because of my own personal ethics and my own personal way I need to do business for my own conscience. But I had a major supplement company some years ago again offer me about 10 grand an article to basically shill their stuff. And they thought that was a lot of money. They thought I would jump right at that. And I said, no thanks. And, they said, well, that's a lot of money. And I said, well, no, it's really not a lot of money. I've spent a decade plus developing a good reputation within the industry and by the users of these products on both sides of the fence, which is not easy to do. I said, so I write 3, maybe 5 articles for you, and everybody figures out I'm a shill for your products, and I've made what, 50 grand? I'm going to ruin my reputation for 50 grand? I said, the bottom line is, it may not be that my opinion is not for sale, but you just can't afford it. And I hate to say that in public because someone's like, oh, well, Will Brink is for sale, but it was a joke. But the point being is, that's how things work. And they did actually find a pretty well-known writer at the time who did do exactly that, and he's gone. People figured it out in half a dozen articles that basically he was a shill. And he's now gone from the industry because nobody in the industry nor on the other side ever trusted him again. And, what did he walk away with? I don't know, 50 grand, 60 grand, something like that. Waste of time. So that's just a side thing to give you an idea of how things work. So if you enjoyed this info, please hit the like buttons and the tweeter buttons and all that. And that helps me get the word around about the way things work. I'll see you at the Brink Zone. Now, for more information on this topic, head on over to www.brinkzone.com, where you'll find my blog, more videos for reports on fat loss, muscle building supplementation, fitness, health, and longevity, as well as a ton of articles in my free weekly fitness newsletter. And I'll see you all on the Brink Zone.